morning, everybody. I'm Jamie Pasquinelli, District Manager of ULI Pittsburgh. Welcome to the first ever virtual regional trends in real estate series. Last year, as we attended our local in-person trends events, we could not have predicted we would be in this virtual world a year later. There seems to be a surprise around every corner in 2020. With the support of our sponsors, engaged members, and dedicated staff, ULI could pivot to continue to bring you incredible programming in this new and sometimes challenging format. This year, we could pull together resources and partner with other district councils across the East and Midwest to provide you with 3 programs to discuss some of the most pressing real estate topics. Again, thank you to our event sponsors, member volunteers, speakers, panelists, and staff from ULI Indiana, Michigan, Kansas City, and Pittsburgh for making this possible. ULI's mission to provide leadership in the responsible use of land and in creating and sustaining thriving communities worldwide is even more critical as we respond to recent global events. As a charitable 501c3 nonprofit organization, we rely on our members and supporters to fulfill that mission. We thank you for that support and ask for your continued engagement as we tackle challenges together. The first part of our program is the anticipated presentation of the annual Emerging Trends Report. Following the presentation, we will have a regional response panel followed by our local response panels. The program will be recorded and distributed to attendees in the next couple of weeks. Here to present the findings of the Emerging Trends in Real Estate Report is Andy Warren, Director of Real Estate Research, PwC. Andy will be fielding about 5 minutes of questions after the presentation, so feel free to type in the Q&A. Andy, I will hand it over to you.
Great, thanks, Jamie. And you summed it up well. Last year when we were doing emerging trends, we had no idea that we would be sitting in this environment this year, but it does give us an opportunity to do things, as you said, for the first time. So there are some advantages, and we're trying to look for the silver lining in every one of those as we go through this year's trends process. And it was unique. This is the 42nd year for the Emerging Trends publication in some form or other. And I do not believe that any year would have been a year where we were in the middle of a pandemic. We've been in the middle of recessions. We've been at the end of recessions. We've been at peaks in the market. But this was very definitely a new year and a new way to try and figure out how to track trends. And it offered some challenges, but gave us the opportunity to do things a little differently to hopefully provide as much and as clear of information as we possibly could. And the one theme that really came out was dealing with certain uncertainties. And one of the unique advantages to doing emerging trends this year was that everyone is dealing with the same situation. And there are, little differences for everybody, but everybody's impacted by the pandemic. Everybody's figuring out how to run their business this year, what they're going to be doing next year, what they know, what they don't know. And it's had, kind of an interesting impact. And we start the process in June. We started a little later this year. We didn't do the survey until August, with the goal of trying to know as much as possible before we put the report down. It was impossible. And even though we did wait as long, we still have things changing. We had an election, going to have a different bit of an impact. Vaccine news has come out, and that's kind of changed the way people are thinking. But basically, I think the things that we identified are things that will have a change on the market throughout 2021 and probably into 2022, 2023, and maybe even for the foreseeable future. In this time of uncertainty, we kind of ask people, are you comfortable making decisions? Because we are in a very unique situation. But, 44% of people felt like they were comfortable making strategic decisions in this environment. Another 31%, not so much. They didn't feel like they knew enough. And then, there's the group that I feel like I put myself in some days, is this 23% who couldn't even make a decision as to whether they were comfortable or not. That's kind of that's kind of how dynamic the situation has been. It's just, what do you know? What do you don't know? And how do you move forward with that? But for the most part, I think people feel pretty comfortable, and that's kind of reflected in their outlook for the next year. They're thinking 80% still think profitability in 2021 will be, fair to good, which is, it's down a little bit from previous years. We've always, kind of been up a little higher. It had been trending down a little bit because the market had been so strong for so long. And it's easy to forget that last year and the year before that, we were kind of thinking, okay, this expansion's been going on so long, what could change it? We were trying to think up new ways to measure how long the expansion had been, the longest economic expansion in US history. Well, we found out what could change it. And a pandemic was certainly something that would, I think, qualify as a black swan, although 12% of our survey respondents last year did say that a pandemic or an epidemic would have significant importance on the market in the coming year. I don't know what they knew that the rest of us didn't, but there is some kind of outlook for that. But people feel good about next year. And I think that's would probably even be higher today because, like I said, this was done in August. So people didn't know that we had at least 3 viable vaccines that might be out there. Part of the uncertainty comes from the economic recovery. We had the sharp downturn, as you can kind of see. This was unprecedented. You don't simply shut down an economy without it having an impact. But the uncertainty comes around, no one knows how an economy bounces back. And this has been, early on, we heard a lot of conversation about the U-shaped recovery, the V-shaped, the W, the reverse square root, all of these things. And this is just employment, national employment, and it shows the sharp drop that we had in nearly 22 million jobs lost. We've gotten about 13 million of those back, but now it seems to be kind of leveling off. So that was unique. The response to it was unique. The Federal Reserve stepping in and basically guaranteeing a lot of liquidity in the market stayed there. Kind of put a little bit of a floor under asset prices, which was very good for real estate. We are not finding ourselves in the position that we did after the global financial crisis of trying to fix where values are. We've got a little time, and granted that's still changing, but now the period of price discovery is kind of back on track. When will we get back to where we were pre-pandemic? It could be 2023. It could be a while. We just don't know how this is going to work, or it could be faster. So it's going to be a period of adjustment. But after that, we think the market will probably go back to, kind of that moderate growth forecast that we were talking about last year. An accelerated trend or fundamental change. And this was a big point. Accelerated was the one word that we heard repeatedly in the interviews, in the survey responses. And anytime you have a crisis, it accelerates trends that are already in place. So we were looking at, some of them got turbocharged and jumped forward. Some may slow down. We saw an end to some trends. For now, they may start up again. But some of these are going to be fundamental changes. These are going to stick. They're going to be around a while. And the first one that kind of impacts a lot of different components, and we're all experiencing it, is this work from home phenomenon. Now, this was something that wasn't completely new because, work from home has been around for a long time. It's been something people have been doing. And this is from a survey PwC did in June, and, 39% had a lot of people working remotely before COVID. During COVID, it spiked up to 77%. If you weren't essential, you were probably working remotely. And at first, this is something as we talked to people in the interviews, pretty happy with how it worked. Got through the initial bumps and bruises of getting everybody the right equipment, giving them access, getting people used to it, learning how to do it. But as it's gone on, there's been a little bit more pushback and a little more desire, I think, to go to the office. And, I think that's been, the longer it goes on, if you're depending on your personal situation. And this is something that's very different for this entire downturn and recovery, is it's impacted different groups very differently. If you're at home alone, it's boring, but you don't have the distractions. If you're home with a family, you're trying to manage online school and getting people to things, or you have multiple spouses in the house, kind of working at the same time, it gets crowded. But the going forward, people feel like we're going to see more work from home. Are we going to see the complete, I don't need office space anymore? No. And I think the longer this goes on, the more we're seeing that. But we're seeing a real desire to look at what could be done remotely and what needs to be done in an office. And how do you manage that? That will be the process going forward. How do I figure out what tasks need to be done where most efficiently, not only for the company and to be productive, but for the employees? What creates the best work-life balance? What makes them more productive? So 55% think, they'll see remote work after this, and that'll have an impact on how much office space is used. And the question is, will we need more office space because we have to socially distance, or will we need less office space because we'll be spaced out more? The Great American Move. And this is partially due to the flexibility provided by work from home. And as you can see, this just kind of looks at, Redfin, people that are looking to move outside of a city. So you look at New York City and almost 26,000 households were looking to move out during the pandemic. That's 23% increase from the year before, but the year in the increase before, just to show that it's not really a seasonal thing, so that these are actually up. And they're looking to move to other locations. And it's due to this flexibility. If I'm working remotely, I don't need to stay here. I can go to where it's cheaper. I can go closer to family. I can go to where there's better weather, so I can get outside more. And, one thing that came up through the interview process is that, a lot of people were looking at, okay, I've had this vacation home, so I'm living there now. And I like it. I'm going to continue to live here. Or I'm about ready to retire. And we've had a retirement home. We just used it as a second home. But now I'm going to live here permanently because I think I can work remotely, going forward. And that'll be a big, thing to watch next year, is as we return to the office, hopefully, how many people continue to work remotely? How many continue to work remotely from a different city, or will they look to move back? And the other dynamic has been, the idea of the city suburb, the urban core versus the suburbs. People are willing to move further out in the suburbs if they think they're only going to be going into the office part of the time. I can live with a longer commute if I don't have to do it every day. And this kind of shows, we think of, the markets like in the Carolinas and, Tennessee as people moving to, but it's every market. And this is kind of that same Redfin data looking at the 4 markets, in the regions today. And you can kind of see it's the gateway cities. On the bar chart on the side, it shows the origin. So that's the city that people are looking at in the destination is the city above, but people are looking from gateway cities to all over the country, to Detroit, to Indianapolis. And another component that kind of came out as we looked at all of this is kind of the technology companies. As they're expanding across the country, it's very rare to find a market where a lot of people from Seattle have not moved there. Well, I think we kind of know the one company that might be driving part of that as they've expanded across the country. Employees are moving there, and it's kind of an option. But will this continue as we go into the next, as we get past the pandemic and continue on? And I think to some extent it will, because once you do something, you get more comfortable with it and you feel better about it, and it becomes the normal course of doing business. Retail transformation, definitely something that was accelerated by this pandemic. We know that retail's been changing. We've been talking about it for years. E-commerce has, put pressure on brick and mortar. Brick and mortar has been looking for ways to adjust. Well, when you shut down a number of retailers because they're not essential, and the kind of the domino effect as it runs through the mall owners and the strip center owners and the impact on retail, we've seen, voluntary closures by retailers. We've seen, bankruptcies accelerate. Maybe, some estimates 2 to 3 years just kind of pulled that activity forward. And it's changed the way retail is going to come back. They've developed new ways. Curbside pickup is now common. People are comfortable with it. They like it. Delivery beyond just the typical e-commerce. So there's been a belief that the US was over-retailed in terms of brick and mortar anyway. This may be that big push that kind of gets us and we begin to see that stretch. And if you look at the number of shopping centers across the US that have, higher than 30% vacancy, it's like, there's like 4,000, I think, just a rough measure, huge amount of square footage. Those are centers that, maybe they don't need to be there. Maybe they could be transformed into another use. Would it be housing or distribution, the idea of this non-centralized e-commerce distribution, so you have the store there. So there's going to be changes in retail going forward, but I think retailers are still going to have brick and mortar locations. It's still going to be there. How we access them and what they provide is what may change. Industrial, kind of the only property type in our survey this year that seems to be a big winner, that and single family housing. Industrial's gotten a big boost from e-commerce, no question there. We looked at the slide before, had that spike in e-commerce sales, and that's truly an acceleration when you jump from 11% to 16%, with some forecasts of it going as high as 20%. That demands a lot of industrial space, and not just the big multi-million square foot box out in the fulfillment markets like Indianapolis, but also the closer in space for that last mile to get it to people quicker, because that it seems to be the goal. But the other part of this is the supply chain. We saw a move to redesign supply chains due to the trade war. Now it's been accelerated by the pandemic, where you couldn't get goods from say China because of the supply chain disruption. So people are looking at, how do I move that closer? You kind of layer in the fact that this was a very big talking point in the election from both sides, that we want more goods built in the US and closer to the final market. So we're beginning to see a move from maybe just in time to just in case. I have extra just in case there's a disruption. I have multiple supply lines in case there's a disruption. So that is a trend that I think is going to stick. It's going to have an impact on different parts of the country. Part of the regions represented in today's meeting clearly benefit in terms of being both on the global supply chain in the US and also manufacturing expertise. So we could see benefits kind of coming from that as this trend continues, and it's going to affect different types of retail, not just fulfillment centers. Kind of a fiscal challenge. We really are looking at, states and cities don't have the luxury of running deficits. So you were looking at hit hard on the cost side by trying to deal with the health crisis, all the costs that go along with that. And then you add in the fact that all of a sudden sales tax have been reduced because people aren't going to stores to shop. They're not buying things. Income taxes will probably be lower going forward because incomes have been negatively impacted by this. And then, ultimately, will property taxes go down? And as we talk to people and they were thinking about the stress that's going to be on cities and states, there was a concern over, would real estate become kind of that piggy bank? Okay, well, we want, we'll go after real estate to kind of make up the shortfall. Certainly the industry wants to pay its share. It just doesn't want to have to pay more than maybe it should. So that's something people are watching as they're doing cash flows and thinking, okay, what's the tax situation going to be? And will that, have an ultimate impact on where, I want to locate? Will I think about relocating because of the, the tax or the fiscal situation in different cities? And this is another one of those questions that has two sides to it, because we're thinking, okay, well, we don't want, the cities to be in too much fiscal distress because it's going to have a negative impact. And this is kind of what, the cities are saying is going to happen if they continue to have these shortfalls and are unable to meet their budgets going forward. And, the ones that really jump out are capital expenditures and infrastructure. We've talked about the last several years in emerging trends that infrastructure improvements are definitely needed and would be a tremendous boon for commercial real estate. Once again, then we could see jobs, cut, which would hurt kind of our recovery, slow the economic recovery across the country. And then finally down there at the bottom on cuts on this chart, you kind of see that code inspection, planning, and permitting. This is a process that people have been talking about has been slow to begin with. Now, if we see more cuts in these particular groups, it could slow down the ability to get projects completed, get them approved, get the inspections, keep them moving, just slow down the development process, which might not be as big an issue now as we're dealing with the uncertainty of the pandemic, but it could definitely be a problem going forward. And then the cuts to community and economic development projects. What does that do to housing? Because that's been a situation, housing's been one of the unique mismatches of this, where we've seen, the single family housing market setting records for sales and prices are up 7% year over year. But yet we have a large component of the population that's in deferment because they don't have income on their mortgages, or they're in apartments that they don't know how long they'll be in because they may get evicted because they've been unable to pay their rent. Technology and the future use, I don't think anybody here could say that they use less technology today than they did a year ago. The fact that we're doing this today, the way we're doing it, I think speaks to that. So 93% of the survey respondents felt like technology will be more broadly implemented in their company going forward. And one element that we think that might be is in this location safety. Enhanced cleaning protocols may be the new amenity that everybody wants particularly in their office building. People don't want to touch the elevator button that 100 people have touched. They want touchless restrooms, touchless water fountains, if you even have water fountains. They want to know how often the building is cleaned and when that happens. And that's kind of replaced kind of these gathering spaces where we all come together to collaborate. So that's going to open a doorway for technology investment to kind of track where employees are, how many people are in an area, who are you close to. So there's going to be a lot of activity going on. And I think this is one of those that definitely continues after the vaccine, after we all get back to work, because it was amazing how many people we talked to that said, hey, I'm okay with that. I always thought we should have cleaner process. There's probably more germaphobes out there than we thought going forward. So this is going to be something that sticks past the pandemic. And then ESG and the focus on social and racial inequity, not a direct cause, not a result of the pandemic, but something that came to light during the pandemic, which allowed maybe a focused attention on it more so. We definitely came up in our surveys around, certain cities like Seattle and Portland, Louisville, that had dramatic, demonstrations around the issue. But I think it helped focus everyone to think this is something that real estate can be a part of. It was a part of the problem, but now how do we become part of the solution? And it's truly going to be, a business decision as well as a social and the right thing to do situation. And it's going to be pushed by ESG as investors look for. They'll want to know. And so we kind of, just to get a background as to how the industry felt, we asked about, systemic racism, and, 68% feel like they understand it personally. Not so certain that the industry, understands what it is, but they do feel like the industry can help influence the change and the solution. And about half the people work for a company that they feel has a plan in place to address it, not solve it, but begin to address the issue. It's a temporary disruption. So what markets are going to lead going forward? And there's been some change around the way we think about markets. These are the top 10 in our survey, very similar to previous years. Didn't change a lot. If anything, these markets benefited because of that great American move and the ability of people to work remotely. These markets, to some extent, benefited. You have markets like the Northern Virginia suburbs and Long Island, New York, that are probably suburban beneficiaries. People spent the spring and summer in Long Island, so now they're thinking, okay, well, maybe I don't need to go back to Manhattan. So, kind of trends there, but people are thinking about all markets a little bit differently. and what are the opportunities? How will they look different in this new post-pandemic environment? And this just kind of shows the change in Detroit, Indianapolis, Kansas City, and Pittsburgh from 2020 to 2021, and the unclear, or not unclear, or wrong, the white background numbers. Those are the actual scores from the survey this year. Not a huge thing. It's 1 to 5, but you can see the numbers are still there. And the change column is kind of a heat map. Did it go up or down from 2020? Kind of see most property types a little lower expectations for 2021. Not unusual in a pandemic. I think we would expect to see that. Industrial, multifamily, or not multifamily, but single family, the ones that were up. So you can kind of see that even if we add, kind of a decline in the numbers going forward or for 2021, the change is balanced. So there's opportunity, and people are looking for opportunities in markets across the country, a little less dependence on those gateway cities that we've known before, or even the next tier down. It's looking for the best opportunity. How's this going to change? Clearly uncertainty is going to continue. Change is going to be on the margin. It's, little changes here or there will add up and make a difference for retail, industrial. Office is probably the biggest question mark. How do we go back? How much space do we use? Where is the office located? Do we look at moving it? And then confidence, I think, is the big key to this. If once we get people confident to returning to their activities the way they used to, then we can truly begin to see recovery. But it will take that return to confidence to kind of get to that. And then no rebuilding required. That's something that's a little nice about this. We don't have to rebuild a financial system like we did after the global financial crisis. We don't have to rebuild infrastructure like we do after natural disasters. We just need to get that confidence back, and then the markets can kind of get back to the way they were before. So it all kind of gets to that point where we're moving to. With that's my kind of opening remarks. You've got a great panel that's going to discuss things on a local basis. I don't know if there's any questions with that, but I will turn it back to Jamie and get started with that. I've got my email information there. If anybody has questions or comments, please feel free to send them to me. It's been a great year in terms of dialogue for that. But with that, Jamie, I will turn it back to you. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Andy. Next up, we have our regional response panel with representatives from Indiana, Michigan, Kansas City, and Pittsburgh. I now want to introduce John McGurk, Vice President of Development at Millhouse. John will be moderating the panel, so I'll hand it over to you now, John. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Jamie. Good morning, everyone. John McGurk with Millhouse Development here in the Kansas City District Council market. Thank you to Andy and PwC and ULI. I think it was a great report and probably the most informative one I've read in a long time, just given the world we live in. So just wanted to thank everybody, and also want to thank all of our district council staff who really keep the trucks moving here on the local level. So want to jump in right away. We've only got a little bit of time, so I want to maximize that as much as possible and introduce our panelists. First, we have Sonia Tillman from the Pittsburgh District Council. Sonia is the Executive Director of the Hazelwood Initiative, Incorporated. Tad Miller from the Indiana District Council, based in Indianapolis, is the CEO of Millhouse. Joe Perry, my fellow Kansas City District Council member, is Vice President of Real Estate for Port KC. And then finally, Michelle Wildman from the Michigan District Council, Senior Vice President for the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. So with that, I'm just going to jump right into some questions for our panelists. I'm going to throw the first one to Sonia. Sonia, Tad and I come from the market rate world of multifamily, where frankly the impacts of COVID have been less daunting than a lot of other sectors. But that's not to say that tenants aren't struggling out there. With your work at Hazelwood and other neighborhoods in Pittsburgh, can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing in terms of the uneven effects of the economic and COVID related decline in the affordable housing space? Sonia, you're muted. Sorry.
Naturally, right? Okay. Hazelwood Initiative is a community development corporation in Pittsburgh, and we focus heavily on the preservation and development of affordable housing. We also run a small grants program that for this year, we repurposed to focus solely on COVID relief efforts like rent and mortgage and utility assistance. We allotted $50,000 for that program in March or April of this year, and it was gone in a matter of weeks, a handful of weeks. And also, city, state, and local rent mortgage assistance program have been just inundated with requests from families who are struggling. So we've seen, very clearly how great the need is, particularly among households that, were often sustained by service sector jobs that have been really, really heavily impacted by the pandemic. On the other hand, we've seen almost no decline, and actually probably an increase in interest in our affordable for sale housing. Maybe in the beginning of the pandemic, we really kind of thought we might have trouble selling units that we already had under construction. We were concerned about that. And we haven't seen any kind of negative impact there. And I would say in line with what Andy mentioned in this report summary, regionally, we've seen prices increase and values increase in the for sale space. So it's been a pretty big kind of chasm in our little world here.
Thanks for that. Joe, I'm going to throw the next one to you, kind of taking what Sonia just talked about. Here in Kansas City, I know the forecast for 2021 shows two positive sectors, a 16% increase in single family and a large 20% increase in continued expansion of industrial, which is big here in Kansas City. How do you think this squares up with the discussion our district council has been having on the City We Can All Afford initiative, which centers around housing affordability, and the Connecting a City We Can All Afford initiative, which is really focused on job access? And give us a little bit of kind of thoughts from your experience with Port KC, and then generally just kind of region wide.
Great. No, thanks, John. I think one of the interesting ideas of looking at those two sectors as being the ones that might expand for Kansas City coming into 2021 is that they both largely have been occurring in lower density areas, and that sort of counter flows to the idea of the issues of strong towns and connecting people to jobs and connecting people to affordable housing. So I think we have to start to look at then what has been working in Kansas City and in our states in the face of multifamily being tougher and housing affordability at the lower rungs, like what Sonia was talking about, being more difficult in cities like Kansas City. Well, we have the bright spot of Missouri finally looking at low-income housing tax credits in a ramped up way again. So having that happen at the end of 2020 and those announcements being made in a month, that's a bright spot. That's a place for us to take advantage of a change in the political environment that impacts our ability to come out of this and connect people with jobs. How strategic will we be about locating that? A lot of that goes to in the hands of the state about approving LIHTC projects. But local municipalities are going to get an opportunity in the next few weeks to really sound off to the state staff on which ones they want to have come to the top of the list. As far as industrial, that's really what my agency is involved in more than anything else. And what we have found in just the last month, our biggest groundbreaking was on one of the strongest transit lines in our cities. That hasn't happened in forever. And to have the Blue River Industrial Park happen right on the last stop of the largest backbone north-south transit line we have in the city, and have the developer come out and make investments into that is something that I think is a model of what we can do in these two sectors. So I think that it really will come down to how do we want to incent the city that we want to build, rather than just taking what the marketplace will finance, frankly. So I think there are some bright spot opportunities for us.
Great. Thanks, Joe. Michelle, Joe hit on a couple things of what cities can do kind of moving forward. And I kind of want to get your take, kind of being with the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, about what the report showed as some real struggles that our cities are going to have and will most certainly face in the near future, or if not already, with huge budget shortfalls. I think Andy hit on this a little bit in his reports, and kind of what, how cities will view real estate, and we quote a piggy bank. But absent federal assistance, which may or may not come, I know there's news today about potentially more stimulus finally, but who knows if that'll ever come to fruition. What are you hearing and seeing when it comes to the municipal budget shortfalls and even state budget shortfalls and its impact on real estate?
Yeah, so the Michigan Economic Development Corporation is the state's, the economic development arm for the state of Michigan. And, fundamental in our work is those partnerships with local units of government throughout the state. And I will say that what we heard in Andy's presentation is reflective of the feedback and sentiment that we're hearing from those municipal partners. They are very concerned about the impacts on budgets. We work statewide, so certainly there's some nuances by regions within the state, particularly concern in, for example, college towns that may not be seeing the volume of students and or tourism centers that have seen an impact. So it's definitely reflective of the concern that we're hearing, and they are sort of active and advocating for those solutions on a, both at the federal level relative to the stimulus that we need and hope comes, but also in in-state solutions, whether they be the supports that have been provided for local businesses just to keep the sort of trend from, not continuing into the future if businesses shutter and leave vacant real estate and abandoned property, but in state legislative solutions that might offer some short-term gaps around local income taxes, that kind of thing. Also in providing supports to homeowners. So definitely active in that. Now, we have not seen, at least over the past, say, 6 months or so in the pandemic, we're still seeing in community development. We're active in real estate, mixed use transactions. Would say the nature of some of them has changed a little bit depending on what it is. We do everything from mixed use projects that might include a mix of housing and retail, office space, and as well as things like theaters and some place-based projects of that nature. And so I would say we've seen a lot of strong housing projects continuing to come through, local government still continuing on with projects that had been in their pipelines, approving tax increment financing and OPRAs for projects. So we have seen that continue. Of course, the construction timeline being what it is, sort of things that are a couple of years out. And I think we share in the concern for services, particularly over the next couple of years as the kind of lingering effects from this play out.
Thanks for that insight. Tad, I'm going to move on to you, and I'm going to throw you a two-pronged question just because I don't want anybody to think since we work together, I'm taking it easy on you. But as a second tier market rate multifamily developer that really focuses on non-gateway markets, can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing and thinking in terms of remote work impacts on migration to our markets, and also a little bit about what you're seeing around intra-market migration from kind of more urban to suburban that Andy hit on a little bit? Do you think that's really happening? And if so, will it last? Just want to get your thoughts on that.
On the migration issue, that is definitely happening. I think Andy's data on his gateway cities sending residents across the country is very indicative of what we are seeing. I'd be curious to see what that data was from Andy a year ago, but with 75 to 80% of all of the housing searches on Redfin coming from the top 10 gateway markets into our markets, I think is pretty compelling data. And the best example I have for that, since we don't have real-time data on that on the leasing side, is just we're in the process of hiring a couple senior people right now. And I just finished the final interviews for both of those positions. And every single one of those candidates was coming from either Manhattan, South Florida, London, or Chicago to be in Millhouse's offices in the Midwest. And so, I think it's pretty telling that migration is definitely taking place. And I don't think it's taking place because of remote work. I think it's taking place because of the interest in the finally realizing how hard life can be and how much easier and better it can be in some other places where you can get more for less, and you can get more space for less, and you can get more access for less, etc. So on the migration, I think that's definitely a big win for the secondary markets from a future growth perspective. Definitely going to be interesting to watch what happens in the 10 gateway markets as far as that's concerned. As far as your second question on the suburban versus urban, of course, I'm an urban zealot, but I actually don't think it's fair to classify that as an urban versus suburban issue. We've actually seen in most of our urban markets increases in occupancy and increases in rent even during this time. So Pittsburgh, some of the submarkets, Kansas City, like Mercado, Milwaukee, Tampa, where we have urban assets, we've actually increased our occupancy and even been able to hold or gain some on rents periodically. The real issue is, I think some of us are using COVID as an excuse for our own mistakes as developers about not managing our supply. So, in Indianapolis and certain submarkets of Kansas City, we delivered more units, 2,000 plus units in the Gallery District and Crossroads, a few thousand units downtown Indianapolis over the last 18 months. Whether COVID hit or not, we were going to see these reductions in occupancy and rent, which is why we kind of put the pause button in Indianapolis, 24 months ago, and now we're kind of coming back as we'll start to see that ramp out. So I don't think we can use COVID as an excuse for that. And then number two, kind of along the question related to the suburban versus urban, it's not that people, at least what we're seeing is people are looking for home ownership and more control over their safety and security instead of rental. They're looking for more space, both green space and living space to run their office, to maybe have kids on virtual learning, etc. And they're looking for less kind of common area where they might interact with other people. And they're moving away from like the areas of town where they know the protests are going to happen. That's kind of more what we're seeing. So people don't typically come into our leasing office and say, I'm moving out of this building and I'm going to go move to the suburbs. They're saying, I'm moving up to the Chatham Arch neighborhood and I just bought a townhome. Or they're saying, I'm moving 6 blocks north to this other building. Or they're saying, I just bought a lake place or a cabin in the woods. Or I'm actually moving and remoting from St. Kitts. Like those are the requests we're getting. I haven't really heard much as we talk on the exit interviews and stuff with our people. Hey, I'm getting out of this apartment to go move to the suburbs. And then tangentially with that, if you talk to David Lesenby or Kelly Lawrence over at Onyx and East, I mean, they're selling houses downtown at paces, twice, way over what they were doing pre-COVID. And so I think that's additional evidence, like, it's not necessarily urban versus suburban. It's a desire to kind of deal with some of the issues that are around that. And if they can find it in the urban core, they'll do that first. And then actually we're seeing just as much, if they can't find it in the urban core, they're skipping over the suburbs and going rural/vacation before they jump straight to the suburbs. Because if you made that lifestyle to live downtown, Salesforce is going to come back downtown. Eli Lilly is going to come back downtown. Google is going to go back downtown in Pittsburgh. Now, will they come back full force where maybe I can have a flexible schedule and remote in a couple days and then be at the lake another couple days? Probably. But am I going to just jump to the suburbs because I might have a little bit different? We're not seeing that in our clientele. So that's kind of my thoughts on those two questions, John.
That's interesting. Okay. I also want to tell everybody watching, I believe you all have a chat function. If you have questions and you want to put them in there, I can't guarantee we will get to them, but if we don't, I would encourage you to jump on your local district council discussion after this and ask those as well. But if you do have any and you want to ask and we have some time, we'll try and hit on those. But next, I kind of want to throw it open to the entire panel for another couple kind of questions. What opportunities or issues do you think there'll be if investors change where they want to invest due to the impact of the pandemic? I know this is probably going to vary widely or greatly from market to market, but I'm just curious what you all think, like as you're talking to investors or developers and what their investors are telling them. So Joe, I don't know if you want to take this one first and kind of give
Sure.
any insight on your end.
Well, I think it's interesting that in a moment where public budgets are going to be so constrained across the nation, Kansas City no different than anyone else, I think it goes back to then, where can we put these things in Kansas City that are going to have a market, are going to have financing? So I think you go back to, where do we already have infrastructure? Where do we not have to expand roads and wet and dry infrastructure? Where does it make sense to redevelop? These close-in shopping malls that are going to have trouble at peers, negative 27% for retail in Kansas City projected. Those are all what I was talking about before. They're on transit lines, or they're close to it. They're infill. We don't have to look to the public sector for as much assistance to redevelop those. I think those are going to be some of the opportunities that in Kansas City I think we're targeted, and in a discussion that the marketplace and the industry is ready to look at those opportunities and is looking at those opportunities. And I think that's a real bright spot for us to take advantage of that. I think that the other side of what Tad was just saying is that for the first time, the report says we're looking at the 20-somethings and the empty nesters in their 50s and 60s declining in numbers for the first time in a really long time, just because of overall demographics. Those are the people that have been filling those residential boxes downtown. And so where does those people that just aged out of 20-something and empty nester, where do they want to go? So I think these close-in suburbs, I'm not confident that the people that left the suburbs to come downtown want to go back to the suburbs. I think the ones I know, they got a taste of it and they want to stay in these close-in areas, but now they're 70. They may not want to go stay downtown, but they certainly maybe don't want to go out 10 miles. So that'll be an interesting thing to look at, to see how the multifamily market looks at niches like that are attuned to the changing demographics.
That's interesting. Sonia, how do you think Pittsburgh, investors in Pittsburgh that you're seeing and kind of on the affordable side, are they going to change kind of maybe product or location, or just what are you seeing in Pittsburgh in terms of maybe kind of investor changes of attitude?
I don't know that we've seen any huge change. I think what I would like to see maybe would be probably not likely, but an expansion of the LIHTC program, so that there could be more affordable housing built and therefore more opportunities for investors to support that. But all of those deals need public financing at some level. So, it's a double-edged sword there. I think that though we have a huge number of seniors in this region, and many of them will be probably wanting to downsize from their homes just because they don't want to take care of them anymore. So there's an opportunity there for what Joe was just speaking on. What kind of housing might they be more interested in? Maybe downtown.
Gotcha. Tad, you want to give any insight into what Millhouse and our investors are thinking about and how that might impact us?
Sorry, I needed to unmute. Yeah, we're very fortunate, like everybody on this call, to be in markets that have weathered the storm better than most of the gateway markets. So we're constantly handling inbound investor calls from groups we've talked to for years who never really would look at these markets, and we're seeing active purchases in Columbus by Starwood, purchases by Blackstone in Columbus, Indianapolis, Pittsburgh, which they never would have even been in these markets pre-COVID, or they definitely weren't excited about coming here. And so to be regularly on the phone with those guys, working with these larger institutional groups that typically have flown over us, definitely lends credibility to the future of our markets. And then I think more directly, um, we're seeing people looking more for yield on the investment side and willing to take less risk on the development, lease up, construction. So, fortunately, we've got a pretty, sizable appetite, and there's a couple other groups too as well for development, but development capital is, much harder than it was pre-COVID. And the terms are much more aggressive. And so it's going to be interesting to see the shakeout between all of the announced deals and who ends up actually being able to pull them off and who doesn't on the capital investment side. But then also you're seeing a wave of capital looking at, the potential acquisition of these assets at a time when, purchase prices seem high, but with what's happened with, lower municipal kind of subsidies and help, and construction cost increases and operating cost increases, real estate tax increases, and then impact fee increases. We actually have purchased some deals recently, at or below replacement cost on brand new product, just because kind of the cost paradigm is going to take some time to shift down. And so you're seeing a big appetite for that in the investment and capital markets right now.
So Michelle, kind of rounding out with you on this question from the state level and what you're seeing from, I don't know if they're relocations or what, but what are you seeing in Michigan in terms of investors' change of attitude and stuff you're working on and seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo some of the things that have already been stated. We don't necessarily see a suburban migration. I think it was Joe who mentioned that. Opportunities to go where there's already infrastructure and supports in place, people still wanting to live near where they're working, and live, work, and play, whether it's remote or otherwise. I will say some of the deals that we've seen come through, particularly in the midst of the pandemic, are some of the underwriting and such standards have changed. So we've had to take a second look at some projects in that regard, as just some of the investment priorities and risk analysis changes a little bit, but overall, we continue to see a lot of opportunities in housing based on what we're seeing and hearing from folks.
Great. All right, so I'm going to do one more kind of group question, and then I think we'll probably be out of time. But the report and the news talk a lot about COVID's impact on commercial retail users, and I think Andy hit on this, and we see it every day. We're seeing record bankruptcies in stores we've all known forever closing down. There's no doubt that there's a seismic shift in that space. That said, though we talked about it, Andy talked about it a little bit, and there's a lot of anecdotal things said. We hear a lot less, I think at least, about the long-term impact of COVID on the office sector. Major employers across the nation, major employers here in Kansas City, and I know Indianapolis and other markets we're in, are keeping folks home, sometimes late into or all the way through 2021. And I'm just curious what you all think about the work from home trend, and whether it will stick long term in your markets, or will company leaders eventually want everybody back as they potentially see productivity declining after a surge in the middle of the pandemic. Could the days of the cube farm be gone? Will office footprints grow instead of shrink? Are we facing a huge vacancy crisis in terms of office? I'm just curious what your all take in this kind of sector would be. So Michelle, I don't know if you want to just take that one first and give us your thoughts in Michigan.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I had a crystal ball there, right? Like there's a lot of dynamics to this, I would say. I do think that you'll see businesses looking at how they can, most effectively do business. I think that we've certainly seen some of the benefits, whether it be around commutes and work-life balance, or some maybe even distractions that don't exist in a cube farm, I think is what you called it. I've never heard that terminology before, but I think that it will, I don't think you'll see the need for office space, vanish, so to speak, where everyone goes completely remote. I think we've also, many of us who weren't remote previously are kind of missing that atmosphere that, brings a lot of enjoyment to the workplace. So I think you'll see companies taking a look at how they can be most effective on a going forward basis. And that could result in some design shifts, as well as just making sure that supply is, matching the local demand based on the trends that we're, as companies do that in-house evaluation for themselves.
Joe, what are you thinking? What are you seeing here in Kansas City? I'll just say anecdotally, I'm seeing a lot of millennials, probably the ones driving the want and the need to get back to the office, just from that learning and career growth standpoint. But wanted to know what your thoughts were kind of in the Kansas City region and what we're seeing here.
Yeah, well, I can't help but think of kind of an '07 moment where office buildings were going for 1/4 of their value in Kansas City, and then 3 or 4 years later they were back. I think this time they will be back too, but there will be a reinvention. Anecdotally, I just went through the lobby of the mixed use building I'm in, 410 units, and every single common area as I was touring through the building last week with my mask on, thank you, was every public area that had physical distancing was full of people with their headphones on, with their laptops in front of them. And I think when we think of that, then how does that relate to the office building? I can't take credit for this, but I think there are some brilliant people out there in the Kansas City market that are looking at opportunities of half full office buildings and buying pairs of them and backfilling one. And then looking at the other box saying, what becomes of this box? Almost every office deal I've ever done in my career has a move clause in it. It's fairly common to move people around in a building or in a complex. And so I think that there are some real opportunities on value to create backfilling. And I think for the office markets in Kansas City that are really struggling and were struggling before the pandemic, this is a great opportunity to reinvent these corridors. What's the best way to create value in those struggling corridors? Have 100% occupancy and therefore get rid of some of the inventory. That's what we did downtown. And that's why I think our downtown has a better market for office than in my whole almost 35 years in Kansas City now, is that we finally have good occupancy because we got rid of the old inventory that didn't work anymore. It's that opportunity. Let's get rid of the inventory that didn't make sense before the pandemic and relook at that sector.
Tad, you want to give us some insight on Indy? I know Salesforce and ULI and all those are remote now, but have plans to come back. What are you seeing in the Indianapolis market?
Yeah, I think they will all come back. I hope they all come back. I don't know where else, how they would recreate what they've got anyplace else in any reasonable manner. So at some level, it's just, I don't know if they have a choice. I would say, as all of us know, the number one increase in productivity by work at home and remote work is the fact that you're a bottleneck for all the other people who need you and to respond to. And as somebody who, was a 3 to 5 day a week traveler for the last 20 years, who hasn't traveled more than a handful of times since the pandemic, it is very painful to work remote. Or I know how to work remote, but not having kind of central command in the office 100% is very problematic. And that's where you see the productivity drop. So there's not really a choice from just, if people want to keep jobs, it takes that to happen. And then, yeah, the social component to it, it's going to come back. The fact that the United States and our medical community already is getting ready to distribute. I know I have friends who are now scheduled to get vaccines here in the next week or two. And the fact that since March, April, May, when they first started heavily working on it, we already have a vaccine. Even if we have a pandemic every 10 years, you know, a 9-month gap with limited productivity isn't going to take people from getting back to what the best production execution process is in the office. So, you know, I think it's going to come back. Will people maybe work one more day a week or a little bit more remote? And will some of us who I'll actually be in the office more because I've learned ways I don't have to be on the road, so I can not be as big of a bottleneck as I was before. So I think but that'll just put me in the office more. And there are a number of us who travel regularly who will be in the office more than we were before, which will put even more demands on the other people in the office. So it's definitely going to change. There will be like more remote work and stuff like that. But, you know, if you can create a vaccine in 9 months, you know, it's going to be hard to believe we're going to see like crazy impacts to a system that kind of works pretty well, kind of in its pre-COVID state, in my view. But I could be wrong. I'm wrong a lot.
Thanks, Dad. Sorry, I've got a homeschooler and a dog running up into my office right now. So story of working from home. So if you hear that in the background, I apologize. Sonia, we're kind of out of time, but if there's anything you want to send us off with in terms of this topic.
Actually, I think both you and Tad hit on it a bit. I was going to say that I think for companies, there's a culture question, right? I think even my very small nonprofit has had suffered a bit from not being in each other's space often enough. So companies are really going to have to figure out if they can preserve or improve their culture if their folks are not in the same space. And then you hit on, I think parents in particular, we really just won't know whether they, from their perspective or the company's perspective, how productive and efficient they can be as long as schools aren't back in session full time in person. And so once that happens, maybe there's a new assessment of whether working from home is something that they enjoy or whether they need to be around people for the socialization and the culture building.
Great. Thanks, Sonia. And Joe and Michelle and Tad, thank you all for joining us. And with that, Jamie, I'll throw it back to you to close out.
Great. Thank you so much, John. Yeah, thank you to John and all of our panelists. That was truly an amazing conversation. I found it very interesting hearing all of your different perspectives. So thank you all for attending the first part of today's program. We will now move to our local response panels. However, we've been made aware of a potential issue with our Zoom meeting links. So when you registered for this program, you should have received a confirmation email with all of the links to the 3-day programming and additionally Zoom meeting links for today's local panels. So after this webinar, we're going to sign off of the webinar and sign on to our local panels. So Pittsburgh's link is correct. So the email that you have received with Pittsburgh's link is correct. Michigan's link is working. Kansas City, you will be receiving an email from your district council with a new local panel link. And I believe Indiana's link is the same. If you are attending Indiana's local panel, I believe your link is the same as well. So if you want to check those emails, make sure you have it. If you do not have your links, please email your district council staff and they will get you to where you need to be. So give us about 5 minutes to do the transition over to the next meeting. And then as a reminder, our next program in the series is on December 8th at 12 p.m. Eastern time and December 15th at 12 p.m. Eastern time. And thank you, and we hope you enjoy your local panel. Have a great day.